So the problem that I try to focus on is how do we deal with all the data that has been collected in a manner that we can use it for actually informing people's lives and make them better. Sufficiently understanding what are the kinds of questions we really want to have answered using the data, as opposed to starting with the data and ending up in scary environments that might be harmful.
Our sort of entree to this space was from the community side, in terms of like we have to empower the communities to be able to do data analytics and to understand data and what data they have, and to be able to do it themselves and be empowered in this space, so they are like equivalent or empowered to take on the corporate world in the data space.
First of all, this is always the hardest question to answer. Meaning the amount of time people ask, what's the best example? It depends, right? And so, so one example that might be inspirational is the example I gave with regard to what happened post Hurricane Katrina, where you had a clear problem, which was from a community point of view. How do we know how the community is impacted? How do we know who is coming back? And how do we then address the needs they might have? And absent that kind of mapping, it would be very hard to actually, provide insight in the needs and also in the evolution and the real impact of the hurricane on communities. And so here they work together with, surprise, surprise, as I mentioned, a junk mail kind of corporation, which typically is seen as actually an organization that has zero value except for bothering people. And here they basically, work together because it turns out that they have the best address data bank in order to generate public value. And I think that was one interesting example. There are a whole range of other interesting examples that are driven by communities that are worth mentioning, including what Jane is doing.
Yeah, the best example I can think that really functions at the moment is Shepperton. Shepperton have a project called Shepperton Lighthouse, where the community basically decided that youth outcomes weren't good enough, and so they decided to set up a collaborative, a community collaborative, and the very enlightened CEO from the start was like, right, data's got to be a part of this. I don't quite know how at the moment, and she got all of the organisations that became part of it to say that they would, in principle, share data and work together collectively. And now that's become quite a sophisticated process. And that all kind of happened, I think, before data collaboratives became really a thing. So I guess the ones that we're working with more are where people and groups and communities come together and say, we've got a problem, we want to address it. And so, I think the data collaboratives we're working with at the moment are more functioning in terms of groups of people coming together to collectively address a problem. And I see that as being a real function of data collaboratives, that in order to kind of use these data, then people figure out how to work with each other. And in an environment where so much is set up in competition, right? So many NGOs are set up to be competitive. This can be a space that actually helps them to collaborate. Suddenly there just seems to be a lot of, it's like an idea that's just got its time, I think, and that's kind of why, we asked Stefaan to be here, because I think once people go, like it's not just an idea, people can actually do this.
Yeah, exactly. There is need for new professions that actually can work towards reuse of data in a responsible manner, something that we call data stewards. And so absent that kind of human infrastructure, most of the focus has been on the technical infrastructure or on the legal infrastructure, the policy infrastructure. But if you don't have a human infrastructure, then it's not going to happen, because it becomes, one-offs, and quite often the focus is really on what we can do, not what should we do, right? And so that's the big challenge.
Well, in Australia, I think if we could get some sort of high-quality use cases, that would really help. So if we had some great use cases that involve government and it's good that there's government here today. And then that they were, sort of discussed, and the value of them, and they were, the practical uses and impacts was kind of really publicised. I think that would definitely help to kind of push the movement along. So that's really what I'd like to see next, is some really high quality use cases that we really kind of track and show the impact of.
In addition to the challenge to be systematic, there's a real challenge to be sustainable. And I think quite often we have ignored the question of how are we going to sustain this in the long term. And so here we need some creative thinking with regard to funding models. We actually also, even need to think about to what extent can we leverage public funding, or should we generate new public funding streams to actually dedicate data collaboratives? Because if you have a data collaborative, it not only improves or has the potential to improve communities, it also has the potential to actually align services in a more cost-effective manner. And so it actually, down the line, it could save money, but we don't have that kind of thinking nor analysis that says that if you would invest in data collaboratives, we will actually save public funding, and hence we're going to invest in data collaboratives. So those are the real challenges and creative thinking that we need to do next. At the moment, data collaboratives is seen as something exciting, quite often unlikely to happen, which is why most people are intrigued. And I think for this to become really part of the way we go about solving problems, it has to become a default kind of position, as opposed to something, let's do a data collaborative because it sounds good, I've heard it from Jane, and perhaps we should do it as well. It has to be something that is part of the toolkit of solving public problems, which also means, by the way, that we have to integrate it into education, we have to integrate it in actually the way we go about social innovation, for instance. And so that's really where we need to go, and that's where it ultimately might become more boring than currently, that's interesting, let's find out more about it. What is missing at the moment is actually a data movement that can really express the value proposition on why we need this, and then also have a sustained action to actually provide access to the data assets that could be important for communities to leverage to generate insight on the things that they care about. Because too often what is being provided is insight on things that they might not really feel are important. And so how do we turn it around and actually have it driven by communities' interests and needs, and then have a movement to provide functional access to this data in a protective and responsible manner. We also need bilinguals, which are people that have a clear understanding of the problem area, but also what data means to the problem area and how they can use it. And so that would be one of the areas that, in addition to data stewards, I think we need to invest more in. And I think ideally you would have, and you see this happening in some places, but ideally you would have, education step up and actually deliver bilinguals as opposed to specialists without having a data component to it.
Social science into technology would be really amazing. It's kind of like, why don't we do that? I think, as Stefaan said, the whole bilingual space is something that we really need to pursue.
So one slogan would be is that assess the risk of data while assessing the risk of not using data. And I think that would be a T-shirt that no one would buy, but at least is what I would like to convey.